Europe is cooked. We have a stagnant economy with too much bureaucracy. The far right is rising everywhere, while our population is massively aging because of medicine and stuff, causing a shortage of workers and a lack of investment or any innovation. All of this combined with a huge war to our east in Ukraine, and our biggest ally to the west is switching sides to join the Russians. Hey, Slavic Vikings, and I am an 18-year-old European. I'm half Danish and half Polish, and I'm joining the Danish military in 3 months. We're living through the peak of the Cold War, or I should say the new Cold War, and I somehow decided to join the army of NATO. I think I am also cooked together with Europe, like, it's not looking good for me. But in short, in this video, I'll give my perspective on why Europe is in such a difficult of a situation right now, and what I think the solution is to all of our problems. Feel free to use the timestamps on the red bar and the description to only watch the parts of the video that you care about, and right underneath that, you will see some buttons changing colors and shining in a second when I say the following sentence. If you enjoy content on topics like this, maybe consider subscribing and liking, and also maybe joining the channel memberships. I only have 1 member, so you can become my 2nd member.
We've been treated very unfairly by every country all over the world. The European Union is horrible.
Yeah.
And we're going to get it back. And I have a choice.
Yeah.
I could just coast, and eventually there'd be a blow up down the road, maybe a long way. But we owe 36
USA
trillion
number
dollars.
1.
So Trump just called Europe terrible, but that's not it. If you catch the words in between his lines, he says, we're gonna take them back? What do you mean by that? Does he mean Greenland, like how he wanted to buy Greenland? But anyway, this is the start of the ending of the American century. America has declared a trade war against Europe, and since we're fully dependent on the US for our defense, we're fucked. This meme basically shows how Europe feels right now, since America basically switched sides, with Trump supporting Putin and spreading Russian propaganda, and it feels like we just lost our biggest ally and it's us against the world. And this is basically the World War III updated map. The world is a crazy place. The fact that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are probably the 2 most powerful people on Earth, like in control of the most powerful country on Earth, to me is so crazy that it causes me to think that we live in a simulation. And Mexico and Canada are on our side because the United States are currently going through a trade war with Canada and Mexico, with its 2 biggest allies, which to me it's crazy. I am 18 years old and I'm joining the Danish military in a couple months, so wish me luck, and I hope I won't die in the battlegrounds of Europe in World War III. And also we think of World War III as a very binary thing, like either World War III, like nuclear bombs fall all over Earth, we're all dead, or we're all in peace. I think there is a much more probable third option of, let's say, Russia attacking. Wait, let me take off Google Maps. Let's say Russia attacks, like, there's peace in Ukraine, blah blah blah, there's a demilitarized zone, whatever, even, let's say, European troops in Ukraine, and then Russia decides to attack the Baltic states, like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, also through Kaliningrad here, and they do this right after the war, when their military industrial complex is still up and running, because that's another thing to consider, is that both Ukraine and Moscow's economy is purely built right now for war. If peace comes now, the economies of both Russia and Ukraine will totally collapse, and it will be a slow process to basically transform their entire country into a civilian economy. If they do ever start a war, they will do it right after peace, like let's say a year max after, and then let's say Russia attacks Estonia and Latvia. Do you think Trump would send Americans to Europe to die for Europe? For some Baltic states with a couple million people? Like, honestly, I believe that If Russia attacks the Baltics or maybe even Poland or Finland and or countries like that that are in NATO, this does not necessarily mean that Article 5 will trigger and World War III will start. We've already seen that rules and regulations and pieces of papers don't mean anything to Trump or the American government anymore. Oh my god. You can see the Gulf of Mexico on Google Maps now, in brackets, Gulf of America. Oh, that's so silly. But yeah, the US has already proven that, agreements and stuff don't matter. I can't help to constantly find similarities to our current geopolitical situation to World War II, since the situation in Ukraine now is basically the Munich conference with Czechoslovakia. So before World War II, the Nazis met up with France and England to agree, basically, that Germany would get a little part of Czechia, but as compensation for the West for this territorial expansion, Germany will promise peace and guarantee the peace of Czechoslovakia and will promise to never invade Czechoslovakia. Does this ring any bells? Because to me, this sounds identical to what Trump wants to do currently in Ukraine. Trump wants to give land to Russia. He says, the Russians, they fought very hard for the land in Ukraine. They deserve a little bit. He just wants to do peace because that's what he promised. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize and all that. So Trump wants to give a bit of land to Russia, no military aid to Ukraine. But then he says, don't worry, Russia will promise to not invade Ukraine again. And as you know, after the Munich conference, I believe like 1 year after the Munich conference, Germany invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. And the identical thing will happen in Ukraine if we let Russia get any land in Ukraine without ensuring that Europe is in a situation where it is not feasible for Russia to further invade other countries by, for example, letting them into our defense alliance like NATO, or at least sending troops. So as if Russia would continue invading Ukraine, they would have to bomb some Polish people, therefore de-incentivizing war because no one wants World War III. If we let Russia gain land without any security guarantees, it to me is so obvious that in the near future, Russia will attempt to further expand their borders again, just like they did after Crimea, just like they did with Georgia, etc., etc. The entire culture and history of Russia is built on this tactic of expansion, much like the Nazis, much like any other dictatorial power that wants to expand their borders for national pride. I thought we live in a world where the boundaries of countries are already agreed on and you can't just invade a country to expand your borders. It's insane. We aren't playing Hoi 4 here.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament. And Europe is ready to massively boost its defense spending, both to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine.
We got it, guys. We got our multipolar
but also to
world
address
back.
the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
NATO does not necessarily mean the defense of Europe anymore. This is something that is extremely groundbreaking. Throughout all of history after World War II, Europe could be pretty confident that it would be defended by the US, but we are living through the time where that is truly up to question. And that is why European countries are so heavily invested in building up their military. The Polish Prime Minister and President have both met up recently to even put nuclear bombs into Poland, like getting the technology from France or something, since currently only like France and the UK in Europe have nuclear weapons, while the UK is not even in the EU. So France is all we have, and I think it would be a great idea to also have nuclear bombs in Poland, since when a country has nuclear bombs, it basically guarantees its independence for the rest of history. This is NATO's expansion since 1949, which is 4 years after World War II ended. So you can see at the very start, NATO only consisted of these very Western countries and then slowly moved towards the east. And this is Russia's biggest argument for why it attacked Ukraine and why it attacked Georgia and why it attacked etc 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 is because of Western expansion of NATO. But this is obviously purely Russian propaganda. Every country that joined NATO did it because it was scared of Russia. Like, to me, this double think of mixing causation with correlation and this shit. No, Russia keeps wanting to expand its borders, since that is literally what the identity of Russia is built on. The Russian identity, and Putin admits this, is built on the fact that the survival of Russia can only be maintained when it constantly pushes its borders west. And that is because, if we come back to this map, you can see the Great Plain. Everything that is green is basically extremely easy to invade, and that's why the Russian political philosophy is built on trying to push its borders as east as possible. The furthest they got was in East Germany, of course, where the plains were on a very thin strait right here, around Hamburg, you know, this place right here, which allowed it, the Soviet Union and the communists to defend really well. But nowadays, it's all the way here in Ukraine and Belarus and even all of Finland, etc. So Russia is not very defensible, and that's their justification for constantly invading countries. Obviously, invading a country is worse than rape, worse than murder. Like, it's the biggest crime a human can ever commit, is start a war. So I'm not a big fan of Putin, and NATO expansion is 100% justified. Who would have thought this perspective from a Polish guy? So here you can see US military bases and Russian military bases. And when I first saw this Instagram reel, I got very shocked. First of all, I expected the US to have much more military bases around the world. And once again, I think they do, because there's no way they have this little military bases. Maybe this is just like big military bases. But first of all, I've seen Johnny Harris talk about this, that, you know, we don't even know where all the military bases are of the US, because a lot of it is in secret. But you can see most of it is in like Central Europe, Middle East, and a bit in Africa and stuff. But what truly shocked me is, look how many military bases does Russia have. And you can see it has, obviously, in Belarus, which is a puppet state, all of the former Soviet countries down here. And then we have some poor countries in Africa, whatever. This is very bad news, and, you know, we should stop it. And I believe the Wagner group, like the, you know, military group that did a fake coup a couple years ago or months ago, you know, the guy that got killed in Belarus plane, whatever. Russia has military bases down here, and then you can see this little country right here. This is Syria. And that is because Russia has military bases in Syria, or at least I think they still do, since the Syrian civil war that lasted like 14 years ended recently, and there was a bunch of Russian military bases in the regime that lost. So now Russia lost all these military bases in Syria, and these military bases were extremely crucial because they allowed Russia to stock up on fuel and stuff. It was its only port in the area for going to Africa, and also airplane ports to fly to Africa for its rest of military bases. So this geopolitical loss of Syria is huge for Russia. And by the way, speaking of Europe, because I'm kind of rambling, Europe has no presence in the Middle East. Look how much presence the US and Russia have in the Middle East, while Europe, the countries that colonized this area, have nothing influence. We barely have influence over our own continent. It's so pathetic what we have become. Here you can see, you know, some of the conflict between Zelensky and Trump. Here, you know, Trump calling him a dictator.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Gotta move, gotta move.
A dictator without elections. That's insane. Who has elections during war? Like, do we... Okay, whatever. I'm not gonna criticize Trump. I love Trump. He's a funny guy. He just isn't very good at politics. This is probably one of the most insane videos on the internet, where Trump posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, Gaza, you know, the place in Israel that got bombed by Israel to shreds, is basically rubble. Fucking dancing women with beards, belly dancers, and Trump saying he will rebuild Gaza into Trump Gaza, and this is how it will look like. And it's all AI music with AI footage. with Elon Musk throwing money, Elon Musk eating, a huge Trump statue with Trump statues in. This guy is such a narcissist, you have to admit, like.
And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East is.
I don't want to be cute. So, if you don't know, this is the world of George Orwell's 1984. Probably one of the greatest books written of all time. So, basically, Trump, as you know, has been wanting to annex Greenland and annex Panama. He's been threatening to also annex Canada, invade the cartels in Mexico, etc. He's, a populist nationalist who wants to expand borders, and he is getting a lot of friends with other dictators around the world, as he always has. And this is the world that Russia and US envision for themselves. Trump is basically giving away Europe to Russia for him to expand his influence in other places, like the rest of the Americas, Oceania, Asia and stuff. And then, I am a huge liberal. I love democracy. I love independent countries. And I really don't want to live in 1984. So, it's a bit scary where we're going.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
So I'm sure you've seen many memes like this, where the US and China create DeepSeek, different AI, different innovation, economic prosperity, while Europe's biggest pride, biggest innovation is just regulation. We love regulating, and to be honest, that is the one thing we're good at. When the EU sets new rules and regulations upon itself and its members, usually the rest of the world follows them in order to sell their products to the huge market of Europe. So that's pretty cool. At least Europe's good at creating the rules, which the US doesn't follow, since that's why like 90% of the food in the US is illegal in Europe, because they don't follow our regulations, but whatever. My point is, EU is amazing at regulating, but nothing else. We don't innovate, we don't do shit, and we have a shit ton of problems that slow us down. For example, the brain drain. The economic opportunities in Europe are just simply not as good as they are in the US. You can earn double the salary of almost any high-paying job in the US compared to Europe. Of course, that is very oversimplifying, since, the currency of the US is very strong. You have to take that into account. Also, you have to take into account the fact that you're going to spend half your money on healthcare, as where healthcare is free in, most European places. No, it is everywhere. What am I talking about? US is only crazy enough to have private healthcare, like only private healthcare. But whatever. My point was... Wait, what was I saying? Oh, that if you're like a doctor, surgeon, scientist, even entrepreneur, and all you're looking for is as much money as possible, then you will move to the United States. And this is not only a phenomenon in Europe, it's a phenomenon all around the world, especially India. That's why there was this drama recently with Elon Musk supporting the H-1B visas, while the Republicans being against it, mostly because, they hate immigrants and all that, while Elon Musk only cares about profits. And when your worker is an immigrant from another country, they work harder because they're scared they're gonna get deported if they get fired. But as a consequence of this, Europe is losing a shit ton of smart people to the US. Not only people, but businesses themselves that move to the US. And the simple reason for it is because most European countries prioritize their well-being, their quality of life, their healthcare, their education and stuff like that over pure money. And I must agree, I agree with the European model. Not everything is money, Americans. So if we look back at this graph, you can see that obviously most Indians and Pakistanis move to the US. This is data from 2021, remember? But you can see that almost all of the other countries in this list are European, including Poland, which truly shocked me. People are slowly coming back to Poland as it's starting to get so much richer than it used to be. But you can see that a shit ton of European smart people, doctors and stuff, are running away to the US to make more money, just to get diabetes and die, but whatever. So here we can see a different version of the meme we saw earlier, where China is building new aviation technology, USA is building robots, and EU is just making these stupid regulations. This is the EU and China. The dynamics between these two countries are extremely interesting because obviously they're the biggest trading partners of each other, ignoring the US, and they've got something connecting them that US doesn't, and that being the Belt and Road Initiative. And that is an initiative that the Chinese have started just a couple years ago to reinstate the cooperation between Asia and Europe in this network of sea routes and infrastructure through the Middle East and Central Asia and even Russia, etc. And what this is in practice is it is basically a bunch of investments into different ways to connect these two places of the world. In short, the reason why China does this is basically a Cold War tactic against the US. China wants bigger influence over Europe than the US has. Already most countries in the EU trade more with China than with the US. And with Trump switching sides and going crazy now and joining Putin, basically Europe might have no other option but to seek closer cooperation with China, which to me is crazy to say because I'm very much against China. They're not democratic, they're a dictatorship who only care about power and control, and their people have no freedom. The people in China know they have no freedom, but the entire philosophy of China is built on the fact that you trade your freedoms for economic prosperity, and to be honest, it has worked. It's the second richest country on earth. I think like 3 weeks ago they officially surpassed the US when it comes to GDP, and yeah, it's gonna be a bit of a scary of a future where I'll have to learn Mandarin. I would much rather learn American than Mandarin. During the big controversies that Trump has been doing with Ukraine and Russia, the Indians and Chinese have withdrew troops from the Himalayas. And if we look on a map, these are the Himalayas, and this is the Kashmir area, which is disputed between Pakistan, India, and China. If you're on this channel, you probably have heard of this because I've talked about this multiple times in the past. And the funniest part of this region is the fact that India and China have an agreement to only fight with rocks and sticks, or in other words, to not use any lethal weapons, no knives, no guns, etc. They're only allowed to have long sticks and throw rocks at each other, which is absolutely hilarious to see, like soldiers with these sticks hit each other on the head in the Himalayan mountains. But as it turns out, the fun ended, the fun games of rocks and sticks ended, and now they withdrew. Maybe this is a way to show unity of the BRICS. You know what the BRICS are, it's this unity of countries against US. It's basically get all countries that don't like the US together, and they're expanding year after year. And they've created their own currency now to fight the US dollar. And I'm saying the BRICS is very scary because it's basically a bunch of authoritarian countries, I guess except India, working together to counter the US. I'm afraid that the US, now being this populist, isolationist, protectionist country, the BRICS will just use this opportunity to get more allies around the world. And maybe the BRICS will be the new world order. Let's hope not. But what can you do, right? Both India and China are in BRICS, since these countries not only historically, but currently still have a lot of conflict with each other. Not only Kashmir, but also other stuff. The Chinese and Indians do not really like each other. The only reason they have this type of cooperation of the BRICS is because they both want some sort of independence from the US. Or I should say US global hegemony. But my point is that this alliance is very fragile, just as the Chinese-Russian alliance is also very fragile. And I suspect actually that Trump's, or maybe the Republicans' deeper ambition is to ally with Russia so that they can counterbalance China. Since, you know, historically, the United States is with Europe together against the Soviet Union, but geopolitics has now changed, a new Cold War has come with China, and the United States is basically only interested in their adversary of China. And that's why they've been investing much more on Japan, South Korea, Philippines, you know, putting nukes here, South China Sea, etc, etc, while Europe is mostly concerned with Russia because of their obvious proximity. And it seems like these two different focus points of Europe and China is what is causing this diplomatic clash between the EU and the US. I do believe this is a tactical mistake from the United States, since this will just embolden China to build trading and diplomatic ties with other countries even more. But you do you, US. 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 This is what we will have to deal with, US, if World War III happens. The Chinese have millions of drones ready to fly at you at any moment. It's actually scary how big Chinese army is. They already have the biggest navy in the world, potentially the most powerful army in the world. But as you can see, the Chinese have drone armies and stuff, so World War III is not going to be a fun place to be. And they're also dominating in AI. The US has had this monopoly on technology and AI for a long time, but a couple weeks ago DeepSeek got released and a bunch of other AIs now that are basically showing that this elitism of USA Silicon Valley is collapsing, and poor Chinese companies can do just the same stuff as the US. Basically just another step into the Cold War. Just like in the Cold War, the original Cold War, the USSR and China were racing towards space to see who could develop the most epic spaceship and do the most epic thing, like land on the moon and stuff. In the same way, China is now in a Cold War with the United States to see who can develop the best AI, who can develop the best drones, and etc, etc. So to summarize China a bit here, it's a very complicated situation. So obviously the biggest adversary of China is America. That much is clear. But the rest becomes kind of complicated. Because what is the relationship between China and Europe? They're very close to each other. A lot of countries like Albania and Hungary cooperate very closely with China, while countries like Lithuania and Latvia are very against China and pro-Taiwan. So it's really complicated. The big countries in Europe, like Germany and France, work very hard to have a close relationship to the big China so that trade can prosper more freely, etc, etc. But with the current situation, where Trump is moving closer to Russia and distancing itself from all its allies all around the world, China finds itself now in a situation where it can truly project its diplomatic power to countries that feel alienated by the United States. And this much has been clear in Asia and Africa, where many countries have been switching sides and getting closer to China because of China's generous investment opportunities. However, now with America going crazy dark MAGA, even European countries are considering a full commitment to Chinese cooperation. And to me this is absurd, because our cultures are so similar with us in the United States. The fact that the United States is being so crazy that we're forced to move diplomatically towards China, it's absolutely crazy. The population graph of China does not look good, and it's gonna suffer through a similar hard time like Europe when it comes to their aging population. But the geopolitics of the relationship between China and Europe are fascinating. Let's also not forget that the relationship is not perfect. The biggest controversy between these two entities, I should say, is probably the automobile industry, where, as you've all heard, the electrical vehicles have been exploding in China, with them creating extremely cheap electrical cars that are totally destroying the market of Europe and America. But the contentious problem is the fact that the Chinese government, the communist government of China, subsidizes the Chinese car market extremely. So they artificially invest in car companies in China to lower the prices of their production so that they outcompete European cars, and people in Europe are basically, through, you know, free market capitalism, are forced to buy the cheaper Chinese cars just because they're cheaper and better. And that's why Europe, a couple years ago or months ago, they put tariffs on Chinese cars, which is kind of funny that everyone forgot about that, because everyone is so focused on the United States putting 50% tariffs on Canada right now. Everyone forgot the fact that actually Europe, a couple months ago, put tariffs on Chinese cars. So Europe is truly alone in this world. We don't even have China. Europe is absolutely cooked. The United States left us. China is in a trade war with cars with us. Russia wants to invade us. Africa wants to invade us in a different way. And yeah, it ain't looking so good, man.
It's a disability mobility.
So in this graph you can see the population of the world and how it is growing, with some different estimates dependent on how birth rates will change, but this red line is what we think will happen. And right now we're about 8.1 billion, and we will peak around 11 billion. That's the estimate. And you might be thinking, well, okay, that's not so bad. We'll reach a couple more billion and then we'll level out, maybe slow down a bit. But population in itself is not an issue, it's the distribution. Since take a look at this interesting website, it gives you a live update of where people are being currently born. So you can see every time a country becomes yellow, it means that someone was born in that country. So since I started speaking, like 20 kids got born in India. Oh my god, this is crazy. So India, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, India, China, United States, India, China, India, Pakistan, India, China, Iraq, India, China, India, China, India, China. It's just mostly India and China. India's absolutely dominating. That's why they overtook China in population a couple months ago. Or I think it's years ago now. Oh my god, time is flying. But as you can see, since we're waiting for these babies to be born, are you noticing something? Here? There's almost no European countries. There's 6, 7 Americans that got born. Is this Poland? No, it's Indonesia. Let's see, where's the European? Russia. They don't count since we kicked them out of Europe. They're part of Asia now. Turkey, that's not really Europe. Let's see, any Europeans? Oh, one guy from the UK, one guy from Ukraine. My point is, 81 babies from India have been born since I started talking, and 50% of the population lives in this circle. The world is extremely unequal when it comes to population distribution, and this is very evident. If you're born on Earth, there's a 62% chance you'll be born in Asia. Absolutely insane. This epic music. This Greek statue thing, by the way, is like a Nazi dog whistle. You can see it very much in far-right propaganda on TikTok and stuff. I'll talk more about that later. But as you can see, there's a 5% chance you're born in South America, 7.6% chance you're born in the US, North America, and 8.2% chance you're born in Europe, and then the rest is basically Asia and Africa. This is a huge issue. There is a problem of overpopulation in India and China, or more so India nowadays, and it will be maybe a problem in Africa, but it's a huge problem in the West, since as you can see, currently we're here. When we grow up, I'm a Zoomer, when I grow up, there will be like 2 times more old people than there are now, and that means I will have to pay so many taxes to fund the retirement of my dad, of all the boomers who now can live forever because of medication. I honestly think that immigration, most geopolitics, everything is less of an issue than this right here. And if I've got any Polish viewers right now, can you please explain? I'm not for peace, the Law and Justice Party, etc. I'm pretty much a leftist, but can someone explain to me why 500 plus, 500 plus is a bad idea? Like where you give every mother a 500 zloty for their child. I think it's a bad idea because you give people money who already have children and not... I think you should only give money to women who have new children. But whatever, my point is, the world population is aging extremely. People born nowadays will live probably to like 120. Half of the West will not be able to work soon. And this is a huge issue. Here you can see a population graph of the EU. What's here in the back is how it looks currently. And as you can see, most people... Wait, maybe I can find a better one. Oh, this is good. So... most people right now are in the working age, from 20 to 65. You can see this bulge right here. And there's not that many old people and not that many young people. So most people are working. This is great for the economy. Could be better, but it is what it is. But look how it will look like in 2100, in 75 years. So I know that's a long time from now, but it's just to give some perspective of what we're looking at. There's gonna be so many people over the age of 65. Calculate this area. If you're a nerd, math nerd in the comments, calculate this area right here minus this area. And this is what me and you will have to pay in taxes to fund the retirement age. That's why I am for suicide for old people. If you're an old person, kill yourself. Okay, just kidding, I'm kidding. What I actually want to say is I'm for suicide if you want to kill yourself and you're old. Like if you're 80 years old and modern medicine has become so good they can keep you alive forever, I think you should legally be able to, with a psychiatrist and your family, etc., be able to kill yourself. And we shouldn't encourage vegetables living in hospitals for 30 years just using human resources and waste. It's so sad that our society is gonna suffer so much through this. When I talk to my parents about this, they say, oh, don't worry, technology will solve this. Technology, AI will save us all. And maybe AI will take away all our jobs and we end up living in a dystopia. My point is this, that the population of the European Union is only gonna stay the same or even go down, with old people being a larger percentage of our population, while the rest of the world, mostly Asia and Africa, just explode in population in the next couple of decades, like they have in the past couple of decades. And this is a big problem for the West, because with time moving on and with the economic situation getting better in developing countries, the population of a country will have more and more of a factor to its national and economic power. Right now, the only reason that the US and Europe can dominate the world so much is because we were first to do the Industrial Revolution, to do colonialism and all that, and we're still living off that economic prosperity. But in the next couple of decades, Africa's growing, China's growing, all that shit. We've seen this website, where is it? You can see where the people are being born, and all I'm saying is that this is scary, and this is probably the biggest problem for the EU. Now, how do we solve the problem of underpopulation? Well, the obvious answer is immigration, right? But we know how Europe feels about immigration. I think it was in like 2016 where the European Union and Europe set this program to get a shit ton of refugees and immigrants. And there were a couple countries that denied. I think it was Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary were like the only countries to not take anyone. And then the rest of the countries, mostly Sweden, France, and like Denmark and stuff, they got a shit ton of immigrants. And since then, basically all countries in Europe have said like, no, that was a huge mistake, and now are radical in their anti-immigration policy, basically following in Polish footsteps. And here I'll start to give my bias, where I honestly am not sure if immigration is bad or not. Because when it comes to politics, there's one thing I truly care about, and that is the economy. I'm not like a white nationalist like all you guys are on TikTok and stuff, where I care about the purity of the European race and we can't lose this purity since, you know, I'm not a biologist, but, you know, being white is a recessive genetic trait. So if you have a mother that's black and a father that's white, the child will have a higher chance of being black, just like blue eyes and brown eyes. But, you know, that's why blue eyes are going down and whatever. You get my point. There's a lot of people who are actually worried about, like, the race of Europe or the culture of Europe going down, but I honestly don't care so much about that. Maybe because I was brought up in many different countries and cities and stuff, but my point is that there is a big problem, and that is, where is it? Here. Look how old Europe is. The rest of the world has an average age of like in their 20s or 30s, while Europe it's like 40s and even like 50s almost in Germany. And we need people to clean our toilets. We need young people to do the hard work in our countries. That's just how the economy works, right? And what other way to get those people than immigration? Like, I know I've rambled a long time for this, so I'll move on now. But I'm just saying I'm not decided on the immigration issue, and I do think that with the huge population crisis coming to Europe and the West, we will have no other option but to get more immigrants. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, I'll reply. And here you can see some of the countries with the oldest people. So you can see this basically emphasizes my point that 19% of Europe is considered elderly, when in Africa it's 4%, Asia 9%. Even compared to North America, we're super old. Like, it's crazy. We're so old in Europe, and me as a young Zoomer, I'm scared of the taxes I'll have to pay to support these vegetables who will live 200 years. Anyway, here on the left is 2021, the dependency of young people basically supporting the elderly, and this is how it will look in 70 years. Poland is not... oh shit, what the fuck? Poland is gonna go through a really tough time. Like, honestly, China, if we look at China's population graph, let me find this. Population graph. If we look at the Chinese population graph, it is also not looking so well. It is here. This is from 2020. So you can see that they have a similar situation to Europe, maybe even just more radical, where the vast majority of the population is living in the working age group from 20 to 65 or whatever. So China's economy is basically perfect right now for economic prosperity, but once this huge group of people here will slowly move up in age, basically this tiny group here will have to support this huge group here, and China is also gonna go through a huge population crisis. I think in the US they're actually doing very well when it comes to their population graph. Let's see. Yes, as you can see here, it's much more solid, and US is looking very well in the next couple of decades when it comes to their population. Europe is not, so yet another reason Europe is cooked.
Du meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe.
As a consequence of this mass immigration that has happened in the last 10 years, the far right has grown exponentially in European countries, especially in Poland and Hungary, like I'm sure you've heard. This, you know, Poland and Hungary fighting with the EU over not being woke or whatever. Right now, PiS has a pretty liberal prime minister, so Poland is moving towards the direction of Europe, luckily. I'm very pro-European. But Fidesz and what's his called? Orban, he is literally pro-Putin, which is very scary to have a pro-Putin person in the European Union, also in Slovakia and stuff, but yes. So this is a phenomenon all around the West, with global tensions rising, with globalism going down. Far-right is growing in the US and Europe. Very scary. Here you can see where right-wing populism has had the most success, and once again we see Hungary and Poland, but all over Europe the populist parties have gone up. And you might ask, what the fuck is populism? We hear this term being thrown around all the time in the internet and in politics, but what does it actually mean? Well, okay, no, that's not what I wanted. Populism, here. The meaning of populism is so confusing to me that whenever I try to research it, I just get more confused. It's where politicians promise to help the, lower class people to fight the elite and stuff, and it's very vague, but basically it's a form of manipulation to make the uneducated part of the population think that they're gonna bring the system down, and then they get into power and they don't do anything, or they just help the elite, when the entire point of populism is to fight the elite. Okay, whatever. Populism is rising in Europe, very scary. And the Brothers of Italy is this right-wing political party in Italy that has also been growing with this Giorgia Meloni woman, also very scary. There's a bunch of clips of Italians doing the fascist salute, the Elon Musk salute. To be fair, it does have origins in the Roman Empire, and originally it wasn't a fascist salute, but still I do think it is fascist with the modern implications, so it's still not good. Here we can see Elon Musk right before the elections endorsing, this was after the elections, I believe, where Elon Musk went on a call to the AfD party, which is the second biggest party in Germany, by the way, a far-right party that is pro-Putin, anti-Europe, wants to leave EU, etc., etc. Elon Musk gave a call to them, as you can see here, and basically rallied them up to motivate them to also spread more right-wing ideology in Europe. And why am I bringing this up? Why am I talking about the far-right growing in the context of Europe being cooked? Well, that is because the right-wing geopolitical perspective is directly against the solution to all our problems.
I'm in the squid of it, everybody knows. I played these games before, I screamed freeze and they froze. I don't know nothing about no prize, I'm not sold. 40-something Billy, one or so, I've been told.
Social media is extremely hurtful, not only on the individual level, socially and for your brain, but societally as well, since I truly believe that the huge rise of the far right all around the West is mostly contributed to the fact that they've been so successful on social media. If you open your phone and start scrolling on Instagram especially, there is so much Nazi far-right propaganda, also communist propaganda, but mostly far-right Nazi propaganda, just straight up racism, straight up anti-Semitism, and I'm gonna be honest, I do watch those reels because they're entertaining and I want to see what society is influenced by, but the fact that these reels are so popular and they're spreading so much misinformation, Russian propaganda, I keep getting BRICS propaganda to promote the currency of BRICS, Russian propaganda with Russian bots, so much Nazi propaganda, just take a look.
The Jews do not feel safe today. We are a people that has been kicked out of every place we've ever lived for 2,000 years. Every single place.
So this was an epic anti-Semitic edit, and it was basically just a Jewish guy saying, oh, we got kicked out of all these countries, which is, historically true, and then the epic meme edit says, but why? Of course, implying that the Jews deserved it. Here you can see just examples of, some Indonesian racism, French woman in 2040, saying immigration has ruined the white race. I don't know if you remember this, but 3 weeks ago, Donald Trump has blocked all defense of Russian cyber attacks to America as another way to concede to Putin, but whatever. There's other ways than Russian bots and cyber attacks that Russia uses to attack the West, and this is more of an innocent one. When I scroll my Instagram reels, like we all do, I keep getting these BRICS propaganda. They always have 20 likes, and it's this. It's just a guy holding the BRICS currency, and we talked about BRICS today already. It's the currency of the nations that want the multipolar world, a world where America's not the most powerful country, but it's spread around other countries. I think it's pretty obvious that that's an awful idea, Not because I'm especially a fan of America, it's just that I think it's pretty obvious that in a world where power is more equally spread, war is gonna be more probable. But whatever, my point is that I keep getting these Instagram reels of propaganda to promote the BRICS currency that is fighting the dollar, and I just noticed there's a shit ton of these accounts that just push this currency, and I just wonder, there's no way that this is like grassroots organic traffic. Like, I'm sure it's just bots that are creating these accounts to promote the BRICS coin of China and Russia. It's crazy. What else do we have? Just some Wojak comics of some regional racism in, I think, Indonesia, some more Malaysian racism, some more fascist propaganda here. Oh, I love this dog whistle here with this Roman statue. Yup, another Aryan classic. Another Aryan classic. This shit is everywhere. And I'm not gonna lie, like, I like it myself because it's entertainment, you know? Racism is entertaining, it's funny to see people angry, I get it. But the consequences of these propaganda messages on social media is that my generation is one of the most far-right generations. I'm talking about Zoomers, like people under 20, compared to just other generations. Usually we're the liberal ones, we're the progressive ones, but no, because of social media, it's turning the other way around. Editing me here, there's something very important that I forgot to mention in this topic, and that is that social media in itself is not promoting the far right, it's the algorithms, right? And because algorithms are so personalized and they're so good at making like mob mentality for specific groups, it basically radicalizes specific groups of people. And that is why, as you can see in the statistics I'm showing above, that's why women are becoming more and more progressive, or for you Americans, Democrats, you know, voting for Democrats, while men in my age are voting more and more Republican or conservative. And this is because of algorithms. Girls, when they scroll on Reels, they get, yes, queen, slay, and they get like gay liberals with like, you know, colorful hair saying slay and all that, while men, we get Aryan classics with Nazi propaganda and Hitler speeches translated to English. The algorithm is radicalizing us. Think about us Zoomers now. We have been radicalized through social media, and COVID and the lockdowns have not helped this, and we will grow up and we will be the ones voting. I'm telling you, the future is going to be very interesting. And this is anecdotally visible for me. When I look in my friend group, especially with the men, everyone is, you know, just a far-right authoritarian. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, this is not looking good for Europe. Here we can see some also AI having a big impact on this, with just more Nazi propaganda. Oh, a lot of anti-Semitism because of, you know, the shit happening in Israel is spreading. Sweden simulator. Oh my god, it's crazy. But of course, let's not forget a lot of communist propaganda is also being spread. I couldn't find any examples because I didn't feel like it, but trust me, I've seen a lot of also communist propaganda on Instagram and TikTok as well. That is kind of my point. It's not the far right in itself that's the issue. It's the radicalism that's the issue. It's the fact that social media is causing people to go into these radical political niches to find solutions to the extremely boring and sad status quo. But the reason why I'm not as worried for a communist revolution than I'm a right-wing fascist revolution is because union membership has never been lower. The top 0.1%, the top 1% has never been richer. The middle class and the lower class have stayed equal. I mean, they've stayed just as rich in the last 10 years, but the upper class has only gotten richer. Class consciousness is non-existent, so I don't think we should worry about the communist revolution anytime soon. Even the communists in China are basically capitalists. Yeah, like, we shouldn't be worried about communism. I think fascism is more probable of a revolution that's gonna happen which is very scary, you know? So this right here is the Prime Minister of the UK meeting up with Donald Trump, the President of the US, to sign some agreements and to have a talk. We've all seen that. And obviously the UK stands strong with Ukraine. It's actually one of its biggest supporters. That's probably what the US and UK disagree most about. But ignoring that, the relations between these two is very, very important, especially for the UK, since a couple years ago, Brexit happened. We all know what Brexit is. It's when the UK left the European Union. The UK has nuclear bombs, which leaves the European Union only with France to have nuclear bombs. But also, it was very interesting for me because the biggest, let's say, white minority in the UK are Polish people. And as a consequence of the UK leaving the European Union, basically, all those jobs that were held by British people were replaced by Polish people, and Poland has gained a lot from Brexit. How has Brexit impacted the UK? So as you can see, the European Union is still the biggest trading partner of the UK, and that's why they've been so desperate recently to get like some new trade deals and stuff, but the EU is more skeptical to not encourage other members to leave. So here we can see the name of potential other EU leaving names. My favorite is probably Austria or Espanope, Quitaly, that's a good one. Let's see, Bucharest, Romania. I don't get all of these, but anyway, the European Union is very strong right now. It doesn't seem like anyone wants to leave because no far right party has won. They've gotten close, but they haven't won. The Grexit, that's a good one, Grexit. My point is that Ukraine has caused the European Union to be very unified in its goals, and I don't think any countries will leave the European Union. Only if, guess what, far right, you know, a far right party wins and takes over, and then Germany leaves, and then everyone else leaves, and World War III boogaloo. It isn't clear how much of the crisis in the UK right now is caused by Brexit and how much is it caused by, you know, the war in Ukraine, COVID, the reversal of globalism, protectionism all around the world, etc., etc. So, as you can see, the United Kingdom is not growing, it's stagnating compared to all these other countries. UK is not looking so good. Here we can even see the here we can see the direct economic of Brexit, -5%, 3%, 4%, so it's not looking well for Brexit. And that's why it might be crucial for the UK to seek closer relations with the US. Maybe some sort of union between the United States and UK is possible. But in short, I think United Kingdom is a good thing for Europe for the one reason that it shows all the members that it is a bad idea to leave the Union. The worse the UK does now, the less chance there is that other countries will want to leave the EU. And in my opinion, I don't think we should let any country leave the EU, or I guess we should make it as hard as possible. But when I talk to my dad about this, he says, let them leave. Let anyone leave and then just let them join in whenever they want. That it is so beneficial that any country will not want to just leave in order to join later, and you get my point. Here you can see every country on Earth that has got invaded by Britain. Basically, the entire world was invaded by Britain at one point, and I believe that this is basically what motivated them to leave the European Union. They've been losing their empire over the last 100 years because of decolonialism, and this Brexit thing was a way to reclaim their independence and old glory, but the UK is not what it used to, it's just this tiny little island. So, let's see what happens. One of the biggest reasons why Europe is cooked is probably its lack of innovation and investment into AI. The European Union, or I should say Europe, has only invested around 3 billion compared to the 15 billion and 8 billion in Asia. It is not even close to enough, but this investment itself is like spread out among many small European companies around Europe. We don't have like an open AI type company where it would be like a behemoth to invest in. European Union is very bad when it comes to technological innovation, and the reason for this is because we were late to the .com boom. We were late to the internet being exploding, and we're now being late as well to AI exploding. And AI is the future. I truly believe that in my lifetime AI will replace most jobs, or at least a lot of them, and basically change the world more than the internet or fire has changed the world in the past. And the fact that the EU is behind and we're just sitting by the US hoping that their AI will be friendly to us, or China, that's very scary, and it's not looking good for Europe that we have no hand in this game. Something that we do have a little bit of a hand in is nuclear energy. You can see that there are some countries in Europe, mostly France and, Russia, that have operating reactors. Here you can see exactly where. This is a much better map. So France is absolutely dominating when it comes to nuclear energy. By the way, if you don't know, I absolutely love nuclear energy. I think it's the most rational and best way to get energy. The only minuses are that you need a long-term investment before it produces power and basically gives you a return on your investments. But we can see that the European Union still has a bunch of reactors all over, but surprisingly none in Poland or like Italy and stuff. And a big reason for the fact that many countries do not have any nuclear energy is obviously Chernobyl. We've all heard of Chernobyl. It is this, disaster in Ukraine that happened that caused radiation all around Europe. And then there have been some disaster in Japan, but that's basically it. Look at statistics. Just because one disaster is a bit scary shouldn't impact your political decisions. But whatever, this video is not about nuclear energy. I have to mention also that Poland is considering getting nuclear bombs. And this is amazing news to me. The president of Poland has met up with the prime minister of Poland and with some conversations with France to potentially get nuclear bombs from France to Poland in order to secure the fact that Russia will never invade us. And when a country has nuclear bombs, it basically guarantees the independence of that country to the end of time. Because why would you ever invade a country that can obliterate your entire country with nuclear bombs? So that's why I think as many European countries should have nukes, but obviously managed through the European Union or some federation. I'll get into that later. But this is great news for Europe. Maybe the solution to the independence of the United States is to get nuclear bombs spread around in Europe. Because, we're in Europe currently dependent on United States for our defense. There's a bunch of military bases all around Poland and all around Europe. A bunch of American military bases, I should be more specific, that currently are basically what is guaranteeing our dependence. I'm sure there's also a bunch of nuclear bombs all around Europe, but all of those nukes are currently, American. We need more French nukes. The French, they mostly have them in submarines, but I think it's a great idea for France to spread its nukes all around Europe so we can be a bit more independent from US protection, since they clearly don't want to take care of us anymore, which is so sad. Oh, okay, one more thing. Look at this map right here. Here you can see the biggest energy sources of each country. So you can see in France, it's the only country where it's 36% of it is nuclear energy, which is absolutely crazy. A huge amount. I never knew I would say this, but well done, France. In most other countries, it's oil. And this oil is from Russia. Oil and natural gas, where they're basically the same thing. They come from the same place, and oil and natural gas seem to dominate this place. And obviously it's the cheapest and most reliable form of energy. But what I think is also interesting is that countries like Poland and Ukraine and Czechia and Bulgaria have coal. Are we seriously living in the 1800s where we're still using coal as our primary mode of getting energy nowadays? I think this is absolutely silly. It's so bad for the environment. Poland has the worst air in the European Union. I'm gonna get fucking lung cancer here just because we like burning coal. And the fact that the far right wants more coal and wants more dirty, bad ways of getting energy instead of renewable sources like hydroelectric or nuclear bombs, which is also renewable, I should say. We should be more like Scandinavia, more like France, less like Poland in this instance. So this is currently how the European looks like. It's very complicated, it has different rules, some exemptions and stuff, and you know, it's pretty complicated. And if we look at the investments into the EU, because as you know, the European Union works in such a way that each independent country has to give to the European Union a certain percent of its budget based on how much it is earning, like how rich it is. The richer you are, the more you put in, and the poorer you are, the more you get. But everyone puts something in, and here you can see two squares. The big square is the country's budget for political investments, and then the small square is the investment into the European Union of the average country. You can see that it is 1.3% compared to 47%. It is absolutely minuscule. Very much like I could make a comparison for some Americans to understand. It's a bit like how NASA gets almost no money compared to the US military. NASA budget versus US military. That's if NASA had the same budget as the United States Defense Department, 800 billion a year, that's crazy. We would be on Mars already if the budget of NASA was the same as the US military. But my point is that the European Union has almost no power because its budget is so small. I truly believe that all of the problems I talked about in this video can be fixed by unifying the member states of Europe into a federation. In a federation very similar to the United States of America, it would be probably called the United States of Europe. And this is how it could look potentially, with a very similar flag to the US. Obviously this is all just artistic interpretation, etc, etc, but it could have a flag like this, herb like this. Its population would be 446 million, 17% of the world. It would have the third largest population, third largest economy after the US and China. The GDP per capita would be pretty high of 28,000, and it would be absolutely huge. Europe inside its borders has everything it needs to flourish. Look at the natural resources or the ground soil of Europe, just for some perspective. You can see the huge diversity of the different ground types in Europe, and if all of this belonged to one country, we would have similar diversity of the ground to China or the US. We would be a third player in this global power struggle. We would have a real voice, a say in the agenda of global politics instead of being a basic puppet state of the United States like Israel. This is not something that I took out of the blue. Winston Churchill himself proposed this, and many people in history proposed this, but as you know, it is not currently in the minds of anyone. And what I think is also very interesting is that a couple decades ago, in the 60s I believe, France had a vote about should the European law have more constitutional power over French law, and they did this vote in order to basically strengthen the EU. But as it turns out, the vote lost, and this voting in France is basically what caused the federation of the EU to never happen, which is very sad. This is another potential way that the EU could unify, by having different layers, and this is something that Macron in France has been proposing for a couple years now, where the European Union could have different layers, where Western Europe would be very integrated, then Eastern Europe a different layer of integration, etc., etc., with different rules and legislations depending on what level of integration you are. However, I don't think this is a long-term solution. This would be a great first step into true European federation. What I find fascinating about this Reddit post is that it is a proposal for 2050. It clearly shows that that Scotland would get its independence, that Northern Ireland would join Ireland, and then both of these would join the EU. And then only in 2050 would the UK slowly start rejoining. And then what I find interesting is that all of Eastern Europe and part of Scandinavia is in this European Union and not the European Federation. So this specific proposal I would not be happy with, because I'm from Denmark and Poland, and both of these countries are just in the European Union and not the European Federation. And I do understand why he did this. I do not think this would be ideal, obviously. Since Poland has a very traumatic past, we are very scared of being ruled by anyone else in Moscow or Berlin or Brussels. It doesn't matter where. We value our independence very much. And that's why I believe this guy believes that Poland will never join a full federation. And he might be right, which makes me cry at night, but that's fine. And then Denmark also values its independence a lot. That's why they have an opt-out of not needing to use the EU currency, just one that is pinned to its currency, much like Poland. Except Poland's currency is not pinned to the euro, unlike the Danish currency of coronas. So Europe is in a crucial moment of its history, and there are many different possibilities of what happens. The first one, according to this post, is that nothing happens. And this is very probable, obviously, where the European Union just stays with no power, only power to do regulation. It doesn't expand or nothing. Then the second option, which is my dream, is reformation, where we unify into a single state. And listen, this is where I know I will trigger a lot of you. You guys are saying, no, but what about my national identity and culture and all that? Please. The United States of America has a lot of autonomy for its states. The states used to be very similar to the European Union in the fact that they were completely independent. The states of America had different identities, they had different groups of people, different religions, even languages, and yet they somehow unified into the most powerful country on earth. And us as Europeans, we value our nationality so much that we can't humble ourselves to even do it. When everyone forgets that the concept of a nation is fake. It was created after the French Revolution. As you know, for most of history, the world was ruled by kings. It was a theocracy, where the king was a king because God appointed him a king, and then there was this hierarchy of the church and nobles and stuff, and it ended up to the peasant who just had to work for protection, basically. And once the French Revolution happened and countries around Europe stopped having theocratic governments, they had to invent something else to keep the country together. It was not God and the king anymore, so instead they basically invented nationalism, where the nation was the biggest priority of the people, and it had a connection to the language and ethnicity. The concept of the nation itself is debated a lot and is quite controversial, But my point is that it is fake, and just how we invented nationalism after theocracy, we can invent unification, we can invent globalism and cooperate with each other despite our linguistic and cultural differences. To me, this is truly my dream for Europe to federalize. But let's see at the other options. The third option, according to this post, is it splits into north and south. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's like inspired from Korea or something, whatever. And then total collapse, which is also probable if the far right keep rising in Europe and then everyone wants to get independence. However, may I ask you, please, what do you think will happen if the European Union collapses and therefore also NATO probably? In my humble opinion, this will just mean that Russia will immediately start invading Europe. If not Russia, then one of the countries in Europe will start invading each other, since the entire point of the European Union was created to make these countries here economically dependent on each other, so war would be economically not feasible. It would not be profitable for France to go to war with Germany because their economies are so interlinked. That was the entire point of the economic zone, the shared economic coal and steel community, whatever it was called when it first started, and that is the purpose it still has nowadays. The countries in the European Union are so economically linked that they're forced to cooperate with each other, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So please, Europe, unite. But you may be asking me, but Polish Dane, how does this solve all the problems Europe is going to? Well, I'm gonna tell you, relax. First of all, we would not have to be dependent on the US anymore.
Часто, мы же со многими здесь многие годы знакомы и часто очень слышим. Там надежнее. А теперь?
The US is protecting us currently with the biggest military in the world, but if the European Union united, we would have 27 national militaries into one, having, I think, the third biggest military in the world, bigger army than the US for sure. A unified EU defense budget would have $600 billion as a budget, where Russia's is currently only 109, which is absolutely crazy. We would be so powerful if we were united. And when it comes to real ground progress into getting one European military, because to be fair, we could have a European military without creating this United States of Europe, but countries like Poland have already said they're against this. Many countries in the EU have said, we don't want a unified military. They don't even want to invest a little into a separate unified European military. To me, that's so sad that we're moving in this direction, but whatever. Another benefit of a federation would be a unified political and defense policy, where nowadays we have countries like Albania sucking up to China, Hungary sucking up to Russia, Slovakia sucking up to Russia, Spain being in conflict with US, the UK in conflict with everyone in Europe. You know, the fact is that the independent countries of Europe have very different political ambitions dependent on their situation, despite them all being in the European Union, which is what causes the EU to be so weak diplomatically. But if we all united into a federation, the geopolitical policies would be unified. So we would be, for example, unified in our stance against the United States and our stance against China. Another issue it would fix is the brain drain. Remember at the start of this video, I would talk about the brain drain. If we were a united country, we would have one set of rules that would allow companies to scale across all EU states. This would basically cause an equal ground to the US, where nowadays if you're in Switzerland, if you're in Austria, if you're in Czechia, it's very hard to scale your innovative business because there's so many different countries around. If we would be one big countries, we would be able to scale big markets so much and create so much profit, much like how it is now in the US. Imagine if we had all the benefits of capitalism like in the US, with the amazing quality of life of infrastructure and European culture. Probably the biggest problems of all governments, and especially the EU, is bureaucracy. That is why Elon Musk has this, chainsaw of bureaucracy and he's destroying half of the government, is because despite maybe his motivations being different of trying to take over the government or whatever, the fact is bureaucracy is a big problem in countries. $600 billion annually goes to redundant regulations and is basically wasted just because it's so complicated to do trade and regulations amongst 27 different countries in one union. If we had a federation, a united Europe, this would eliminate all paperwork duplication and streamline the system into a very efficient government. Another way a unified Europe, like you can see here, would fix, for example, the brain drain, is that it would increase the research and development budget and it would offer a unified academic funding. And then it would have a similar system to the US with federal grants. The US is extremely efficient in its investments into research and development projects because of its federal grants that can be, federated from a unified budget split around the states. Right now, because of the way bureaucracy is managed in Europe, it is so inefficient and research is a bad idea. It's not incentivized at all. A federalized Europe would fix this. Let's move on. Oh, and yes, by the way, this is why the US dominates AI and biotech. It's because of this federal funding that supports companies and universities like MIT and Stanford that simply do not exist in Europe because of our stupid bureaucracy. Europe is currently just a battleground, much like Africa, for US and China to spread their influence. They're investing in different countries, both in different places, to spread their influence like we're some chessboard. And I personally would prefer to be a chess player than a chessboard. So if we unified, we would be able to diplomatically negotiate as a single bloc, which would give us huge leverage against the US and China. Then basically, instead of Europe being a battleground for influence of US and China, they would be fighting to get our friendship to fight each other, which would let us play them off each other to get the best possible benefits, much like Brazil is doing nowadays, where they're playing both sides to get the best outcome, and India's also kind of doing. Europe could do the same if we unified. So, with globalism collapsing and World War III on the horizon, another reason why a federation would be a good idea is it would decrease dependence on China. Not only diplomatically, but literally by getting resources from itself and not China. Currently we get a shit ton of rare earth metals for like EV batteries and tech companies from China. And if we were unified, we would have everything we need in Europe and we could just trade amongst each other instead. So currently we're living in the late stages of capitalism. And what this means is that all the big companies have merged with so many other companies or acquired so many other companies that, the entire market is basically ruled by like 5 different companies. But my point is that if Europe unified, we could truly federate and instill antitrust policies that would break up monopolies and enforce fair market competition. I must admit, this is something the EU is good at. We like suing big companies and even countries when they're doing unfair stuff. And if the EU would federate, we would have this regulation as our identity. Let's create this identity of regulation. That's what makes us European, is that we're good at regulation. And if we were unified, we could have a strong hand to regulate the huge companies that are basically more powerful than countries. And don't get me wrong, I'm a capitalist, right? I do like the free market, but I truly believe that the market can only be free and fair if it is regulated to, so monopolies don't exist, and so that it is fair to have competition. If I would have to give an example, it is Denmark. Denmark is statistically the winner of the country where it is easiest to create a business. It's easiest for new businesses to rise and be successful, etc., etc. And then you, as an capitalist American, might be thinking, oh, what? Gosh darn it, I thought Denmark was a socialist paradise. And no, Denmark is very capitalist. The difference is that we have very strong regulation in Denmark, which allows, kind of counterintuitively, capitalism to flourish even more. I know I'm sounding like a huge liberal here, but please understand where my thinking is here. And if Europe would federate, we would absolutely dominate in this regulation of capitalism that would create the most prosperous society on earth. So the biggest issue of Europe is its aging population and lack of a young workforce, even nowadays, even more in the future. And a federated Europe would also fix this issue, because first of all, we would have a unified migration policy, which would make it much easier for us to get the best workers on Earth. I truly believe that if Europe federated, we would be the new brain drain black hole, if you will, of the world, where countries would want to go to Europe, because we would be a unified nation with huge potential for growth, where nowadays it's hella complicated to go to a specific country, and the potential of a country is unclear in this weird union of Europe. And if I were to give an example of why I think this would fix the population problem, is, Canada and the US. They're absolutely huge, one of the biggest countries on Earth, and they get a shit ton of skilled labor basically for their size. They give a very good capitalist environment for new entrepreneurs and stuff, and they're very big, which means they have a huge market to expand. However, if you're a businessman, entrepreneur, someone with ambition, let's say in South America, Africa, or anywhere in Asia, why would you want to move to Hungary or Slovakia, where the best you will do is create a company that dominates the single market of Slovakia? Whereas if Europe unified, you would have the biggest market in the world. Europe is the biggest market in the world. By far, we overpass America. So if we unified, we would have the biggest market in the world, where companies would have the most potential to grow. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I truly believe that if Europe unified, it would satisfy the needs of the right to create glory for their nation, since basically we would have a new Roman Empire. If you are on the right, I guarantee you have a fetish for the Roman Empire and how powerful it was, and think about how powerful your European country would be if you were unified into the new Roman Empire. I have a weird sense that this either, if you're on the far right, you either hate or love this idea, obviously. And I do believe that if we federated, we not only would be able to legislatively fight the far right, but also it would extinguish some of the need of the people to look for alternatives for safety, since this union would be extremely safe. We would also be able to have a unified energy policy, being able to use the best areas for energy, because right now this area right here between England and Denmark is like the best place to have wind farms in the world. So then all of Europe could only invest in wind farms here to power all of Europe. We could get oil from the Netherlands and Norway to fuel all of Europe, and basically each region of Europe could specialize in what they're best at to bring more prosperity to the entire union. And listen, I know what we're all thinking, the Third Reich was basically an attempt to do this. Map peak. So this might ring some bells, since it's very similar to what's right here, right? This is basically a unified Europe. But the difference is that this Europe was not unified under a European identity. It was unified under the racial beliefs of the Aryan superiority. Germany never intended to incorporate countries into its country. It intended to kill everyone that didn't align with their racial beliefs and then just replace them with Germans. This is not at all what I want, obviously. And what I would propose is for something similar to the United States, where the states in Europe would potentially have even more autonomy than states have in the US nowadays, whereas here obviously I don't imagine the general government had a lot of autonomy during the Third Reich. But yeah, I just want to make it clear that this is not what I want. No one wants this, and it's not at all similar. And if we don't unify soon into a democratic federation, one of the countries will revolt and they will fucking cause this by military force. If that may be, it might be Russia, it might be AfD, Germany falling into radicalization, any country, please. In summary, Europe is cooked, and our biggest ally, the US, is leaving us. China is dominating our trade. Russia wants to invade us in the next 1 or 2 years, and Europe is absolutely cooked. And the way we fix this is by unifying and creating this nation. So, I know what you guys are all thinking. Polish Dane, aren't you being kind of idealistic and crazy? Obviously, this will never happen. Well, there's a couple of things I have to say to you if you say that. First of all, even if we never achieve this, or in our lifetimes don't achieve this, I truly believe any step towards this direction would be a positive. We don't have to immediately create the country of Europe tomorrow. Just step by step move towards the direction, much like the European Union was doing but stopped. So, for example, start off by expanding the member states, then creating some legislation that would make the laws more powerful, then a unified army, then unified currency everywhere, and then step by step move towards this democratic union. It's not about the final destination, it's about moving in a direction. That's what democracy is all about, is you vote for the parties that move the country in the direction that you want. I only recently could start voting because I'm 18, and I will vote for whatever party is most pro-EU. I don't care about much else, honestly. So that is my point here. Okay, so the video is over now. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. However, I do have a little bit more of content that I would like to talk about. So here you can see all of the countries that got invaded or controlled by Europe. You can see that basically the entire world was at one point controlled by Europe, and this just shows the huge potential we have. Or I don't get me wrong, I don't say we should invade again. I just want to show some perspective of how pathetic we are nowadays compared to how we were. On the positive side, look at this graph of worldwide battle deaths per 100,000 people. I don't think this is totally updated to the last years, but even in the last 3 years with what's happening in Israel and Ukraine, it is nothing compared to the brutal wars of World War II and all of history. We're in the safest time in history now. And the reason for it? Nuclear bombs, mutually assured destruction. No one wants to start a huge conflict because they're scared they're gonna be bombed to smithereens. And that's why I do also believe that nuclear bombs are great, because they have caused this global peace. Why I think Poland should get nukes, and I actually made a video on why nukes are potentially a good idea, but nobody watched it. But yeah. This is Europe right here. Nice map of the geography. And here you can see, like I mentioned at the start of the video, that the mountains of Europe are one of the biggest issues that have caused the cultural differences. What the fuck am I yapping about? Here you can see a graph of EU's most innovative nations, and you can see that Sweden, Finland, Denmark and the Netherlands are at the top, being innovation leaders. And I think this is just something interesting to know. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting map. Better places to be born and worse places to be born. A very not scientific map, but it's kind of true. But, you know, so I was born in the better places, but I live in the medium place of Poland, but this truly depends on if you're born in a city or not. Like, if you were born in the US in bumfuck nowhere, Ohio, then it's a bad place to be born. But if you were born in Warsaw, in the capital of Poland, then it's a good place to be born. But if you were born in middle of nowhere in Poland, then it's a bad place. It's mostly has to do with if you're born in a city or in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. This is a map of where it's illegal to be gay. Also very interesting map. Here you can see it's a very detailed. You can die in some places for being gay. Interesting. And this is a very interesting map. It shows which exports make your country the most money. And so you can see here that many different countries in Europe are the best at different things. And this means that if we unified into a federation, all of this would be mixed up into this beautiful cooperation of markets and production that would be beautiful. And in summary, this is what we don't want. This is the world we're moving towards. We're moving towards dictators having power. We're moving towards the superpowers splitting up the world. And this is the world we want. We want the new Roman Empire. One more thing I would like to talk about this video. This video obviously was very political. You can disagree with me on some topics and still watch and enjoy my videos. Just because you disagree with the content or messaging of a content creator shouldn't impact the way you think of him or if you watch them or not. Like, in my opinion, it's so weird that people nowadays close themselves in this circle jerk and only watch content they agree with. To me, that misses the entire point of the internet, and I think it's a beautiful thing that basically I live in the first time in history where it's super easy and accessible to see and watch and get the viewpoint of every radical ideology on the spectrum. So I'd like to give some examples of channels I all watch and enjoy a lot. So if I were to put myself somewhere on this graph, it would be in the middle, but that's not because I'm a centrist. I would guess consider myself a radical centrist because I have opinions all around the spectrum. But whatever, this spectrum is stupid anyway, it oversimplifies everything. But H3 Podcast, for example, he's a big liberal, he's like in the down left corner. Then we have What If Alt His, he's basically far right, you know, nationalist, you could say. Monsieur Z, I love this guy's content, however he's basically a Trumpist and he's on the right. Recently he posted something about the EU being stupid and he's pro US and Russian alliance, which I disagree with a lot and it's very sad for me to see it. But all I do is dislike that post and I can move on with my life and still watch this guy who has great content and I can get a perspective of someone who actually likes Trump. That's why I also like Asmongold. He's the biggest streamer in the world. I love watching his streams on Trump. It lets me get a perspective of someone who actually likes Trump, which is absolutely fascinating to me. Mr. Beat, kind of a liberal. Jake Bro, very pro-Ukraine capitalist guy. Jordan Peterson, he used to be in the center, now he's like pretty far right, but I also watch him sometimes just to get the perspective of the right, you know, it's important. Hassan, who is obviously a communist, I love watching him. Vosh, another communist. Destiny, I also love watching him. He's like a anarcho-capitalist. Second Thought, a radical communist show, also love watching it. Love getting the communist perspective. And when it comes to communists, basically everything communists say is true and I agree with. But I just care more about economic prosperity. I care more about the market flourishing and yeah, whatever. iDubbbz, I have iDubbbz here because I watch both iDubbbz and Sam Hyde. They hate each other, they couldn't disagree more, yet I enjoy both. You don't have to get personal with your beliefs, guys. Okay, oh, this is the world divided up by economic power. So basically GDP, if it were a map, you can see Africa basically not existing, half of Asia basically not existing, and this is kind of an interesting map to think of the modern dynamics. Since you can see Europe and US is basically equal with China and India and I just think this is a map that is very interesting to look at, to consider the real geopolitics of how stuff works nowadays. Then we have stuff like this, where as a consequence of the late stages of capitalism, we have all the richest people in the world meeting in one room with the president and Elon Musk to talk and mingle. I don't know, I think we've all seen this clip. It's just a bit scary to see so many powerful people consolidate power even more. Yeah, whatever. So next up we have a graph that compares the rent prices to household income from 1985 to nowadays. Just take a look. So this is obviously all relative and it compares the two. So throughout the decades, our income has been the same or very close, while rent prices have just go up. And whom do these high rent prices benefit? And I'll tell you who. It's the boomers who own all the houses, who bought all the houses when it cost a couple $1,000s. And basically, it's almost impossible to own some property nowadays without just waiting until your parents die, or, you know, getting lucky, or being a millionaire. But this is yet another crisis facing Europe especially, and the West in general, especially Australia. And it's also simply the consequence of, that's right, late stage capitalism. Since without regulation, you just have people who see that rent prices are going up, property and real estate is more and more valuable year by year. So naturally, they buy funds and invest into property. So instead of the people who own the property owning the building they live in, it's a bunch of billionaires and millionaires investors who just hoard houses and real estate because they know it will increase the value in the future. And I truly believe that a potential fix to this issue that will inevitably lead to long-term problems is tax on real estate, a land tax. What's the guy called who invented it? He's like famous. What's it called? The land tax guy. I watched a video on it. Land tax. Georgism, right. This guy who was like an economist in America a while ago, he suggested that to remove all taxes, literally all taxes, and then you only tax based on how much land you own. And the reason for this is because then you incentivize people to be productive with their land. If you're unproductive with your land, if you're just hoarding it because it's getting more and more valuable every year, you sell it to, or that's what's happening now. My point is that in a Georgist society, that would not happen because you would sell your property to someone who would make it productive. And obviously I'm not an economist, but I genuinely don't see what's the issue with Georgism. It not only fixes the housing market problem, you remove all taxation that exists, and you incentivize people to be productive with their land. Someone in the comments please explain to me why Georgism is a bad idea. But anyway, I got kind of out of track here. Okay, so in summary, if Europe unified or moved towards unification, it would solve all our problems. Europe is absolutely cooked right now, and we're in a very difficult situation where Trump is seeming to wanting to build an alliance with Russia to counter Chinese expansion, since that's what the US has been focused on, while Europe is in this confusing situation where they're strengthening their ties with Canada and Mexico. Oh yeah, by the way, I just got a notification that because currently there's a trade war, if you're watching this video in the future, currently there's a trade war between United States, Mexico and Canada. It's kind of lucky that the EU is just kind of in the background waiting, since Trump said that the EU will get those tariffs, but just later. Never mind, a couple days after recording this video I'm editing right now, Trump indeed started the trade war with Europe also, by like putting tariffs on, I believe, champagne and wine or something. And also I would like to add that I'm a bit pessimistic in this video, obviously, because of the title, but I am optimistic about Europe's future because of how Trump is fumbling America's economy right now. There's actually a lot of investments going into Europe right now. So Trump fucking up America so badly right now might actually cause Europe to finally overtake America. But right now there's a trade war between Canada and United States and Mexico and a bit China also. But because Canada raised their tariffs in response to US raising tariffs, Trump raised tariffs again. So now there's a 50% tariff on, I think, steel. So in response, Canada stopped like imports into Michigan and stuff where they get all of their energy. In short, there's a trade war between the two strongest allies. Like these two countries used to be the strongest allies in the world, and it's such a big tactical mistake for the United States to distance themselves from Mexico and Canada, because I feel like the entire point of being American is that you have two oceans in between you, and you're so safe, and you're basically indestructible, because the two countries that border you are your biggest allies. But now the United States is distancing themselves from Mexico and Canada. So why the fuck wouldn't Canada or Mexico be like, China, how about you put your military bases here? And then the entire point of US isolationism is done because Mexico joins, let's say, China or the EU or whoever. If I would be the United States, I would be the kindest to my two greatest allies of Canada and Mexico, but whatever. My point is, this video is over. The world is scary. World War III will happen in a couple years. I'm joining the military in like half a year. Maybe not the best time, but I don't know. Hopefully I'll fight for a united Europe or something. Consider subscribing and liking. Join the membership. Check the Discord. Follow the social medias. And I hope you enjoyed. And as always, farewell, żegnam, and goodbye.
And our continent is called Europe.